She flipped to another page, each movement deliberate, theatrical, designed for maximum impact. You want to discuss financial literacy? Let's discuss your legal fees. $2.5 million and counting, according to public filings. That's a lot of money for someone who claims to be innocent. I managed to pay off my student loans on a bartender's salary. You can't even pay your lawyers without begging donors for help. The power of preparation over privilege had never been more starkly displayed. Gaetz had every advantage: wealth, connections, the presumption of superiority that comes from never having to earn anything. But AOC had something more powerful. She'd done the work. While he was coasting on Daddy's money and Daddy's name, she was studying. While he was learning to lie, she was learning to lead. The bartender had outworked the heir, and the results were devastating. This highlighted a fundamental truth about working-class experience creating better leaders. AOC understood budgets because she'd had to make $200 last 2 weeks. She understood healthcare because she'd been uninsured. She understood corruption because she'd seen how the powerful prey on the powerless every shift behind the bar. Her inexperience was actually expertise in real life, something Gaetz wouldn't recognize if it served him a subpoena. The memes evolved at fiber optic speed. Gaetz's panicked face became the new shocked Pikachu. His Venmo history was photoshopped onto everything from restaurant menus to college applications. Someone created a Matt Gaetz payment generator that produced random suspicious transactions: $600 for homework help, $400 for vitamin water, $1,000 for definitely not crimes. It crashed from traffic within hours. To understand how a bartender from the Bronx destroyed Florida's most corrupt congressman, we need to rewind 24 hours to when the House convened for debate on the Congressional Ethics and Accountability Act. The bill should have been uncontroversial. Basic reforms requiring members to disclose conflicts of interest, limit stock trading, and face real consequences for ethics violations. In any functioning democracy, this would pass unanimously. But Matt Gaetz saw it differently. This is nothing but virtue signaling from socialists who want to destroy the free market. Gaetz thundered from his seat, his voice carrying that particular blend of privilege and panic that comes from someone with everything to hide. The radical left, led by Instagram influencers like AOC, wants to criminalize success and punish achievement. The projection was so thick you could cut it with a subpoena. Here was Matt Gaetz, currently under federal investigation for sex trafficking, whose former wingman was literally in prison cooperating with prosecutors, whose Venmo history read like evidence in a criminal trial, lecturing the House about ethics. It was like watching a fox covered in feathers explain why the henhouse didn't need better security. But this wasn't just about one corrupt congressman's hypocrisy. This was about the soul of American democracy. Could Congress police itself? Could the powerful be held accountable? Or would the Matt Gaetzes of the world continue to treat public service as a personal playground, protected by privilege and shamelessness? The ethics reform bill represented everything Gaetz feared: transparency requirements that would expose his financial dealings, accountability measures that would make his behavior actionable, real consequences for the kind of corruption he'd built his career on. No wonder he was fighting it like his life depended on it, his political layers, if absolutely did. What Gaetz didn't know was that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been preparing for this exact moment for weeks. While he was crafting sound bites about socialist virtue signaling, she was building something far more dangerous: a comprehensive file on Matt Gaetz's corruption, complete with receipts, timelines, and connections that painted a picture so damning it belonged in a prosecutor's office, not a congressional debate. Her team had worked overtime, not on talking points or zingers, but on facts. Every Venmo payment cataloged, every ethics violation documented, every connection between his votes and his donors mapped. AOC understood something Gaetz didn't. In the age of social media, you didn't win with volume. You won with receipts. They expect me to get emotional, AOC had told her staff that morning. They expect the young Latina to lose her cool when the privileged white boy attacks. That's what they're counting on. So we're going to give them something else entirely. We're going to give them evidence. The preparation was meticulous. She'd studied Gaetz's patterns, his triggers, his weaknesses. She knew he couldn't resist attacking women, especially women of color, especially her. She knew he'd make it personal because he always did. She knew he'd underestimate her because men like him always underestimated women like her, and she knew that would be his downfall. As the debate progressed, Gaetz grew more theatrical, more personal, more vicious in his attacks on the bartender from the Bronx who dared to lecture him about ethics. He was performing for his base, for the cameras, for the Trump approval he still desperately craved. He thought he was winning. AOC sat quietly, taking notes, occasionally smiling at something he said. Not the angry smile of someone plotting revenge, but the confident smile of someone who'd already won and was weighty, waiting for her opponent to realize it. She'd laid the trap perfectly. All Gaetz had to do was walk into it. And walk he did, with all the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Gaetz thought attacking the bartender would be easy. He was about to learn that sometimes the person serving drinks is the smartest one in the room. While Gaetz was hunting his next victim, a young woman was sharpening her weapons: facts, receipts, and the truth. But to understand why AOC's eventual destruction of him was so satisfying, you need to understand the pattern of predatory politics that Matt Gaetz had perfected. Gaetz's attacks on women weren't just political, they were pathological. From his first day in Congress, he'd targeted female colleagues with a viciousness that went beyond normal partisan warfare. But AOC, she was his white whale. Young, beautiful, intelligent, powerful, and everything he believed women shouldn't be allowed to be. She triggered every insecurity in his privileged soul. The attack started immediately after her election. The bartender who thinks she's a brain surgeon, he'd sneer on Fox News. Instagram's congresswoman, he'd tweet at 2 a.m. Maybe if she spent less time on social media and more time learning how government works, he'd say, despite her legislative record running circles around his. Every attack dripped with the particular poison of a man who couldn't stand that a woman he'd have hit on in a bar was now his equal in Congress. But the sexism was just the surface. Underneath was something darker, projection so pure it belonged in a psychology textbook. While Gaetz was calling AOC financially illiterate, he was allegedly using campaign funds for personal expenses. While he was questioning her qualifications, he was under federal investigation for crimes that would make a mob lawyer blush. While he was attacking her integrity, his own best friend was in federal prison, singing to prosecutors about their shared adventures in allegedly trafficking minors. The federal investigation that Gaetz pretended didn't exist was the elephant in every room he entered. Sex trafficking, Mann Act violations, abuse of power, the kind of charges that end careers and start prison sentences. Yet here he was, strutting around Congress like he owned the place, attacking women who'd done nothing but serve their constituents while he'd allegedly served himself to teenagers. His Trump-learned tactic was simple: attack your accusers harder than they attack you. When the news broke about the investigation, did Gaetz lay low? Did he show humility? Of course not. He went on the offensive, claiming witch hunts and deep state conspiracies, all while his Venmo history was being scrutinized by federal agents. He'd learned from the master: when you're guilty, act guiltier but louder. The recent escalation of his misogynistic rhetoric wasn't random. As the walls closed in, as his friend cooperated with prosecutors, as his political future dimmed, Gaetz's attacks on women intensified. It was the death rattle of toxic masculinity, the last gasps of a man who knew his time was running out, but couldn't stop himself from making it worse. His fatal flaw, the weakness that would ultimately destroy him, was his complete inability to see women as intellectual equals. In Gaetz's mind, women were either conquests or inconveniences, never competitors. He looked at AOC and saw a bartender playing dress-up in Congress, not recognizing that she was playing chess while he was playing with himself. This blindness made him reckless. He'd attack AOC's intelligence while she was crafting legislation. He'd question her economics degree while she was explaining monetary policy better than Treasury officials. He'd call her just a bartender while she was building a movement that would reshape American politics. Every insult revealed more about his insecurities than her abilities, The pattern was always the same. Attack the woman's appearance, intelligence, or background, dismiss their achievements, project his own failures onto them, rally his base of similarly insecure men, rinse and repeat. It had worked for years because he'd never faced someone who was prepared for it, who studied it, who knew how to turn his own tactics against him. But AOC wasn't just any woman. She was a woman who'd spent years dealing with drunk men who thought they were clever. She'd handled every form of condescension, every variety of sexism, every flavor of male privilege. And she'd learned that the best way to deal with predators wasn't to run or hide, or even fight back in the way they expected. It was to let them reveal themselves, then destroy them with their own words. Gaetz thought his predatory politics made him powerful. He was about to learn they'd only made him predictable. While Gaetz was hunting his next victim, a young woman was sharpening her weapons: facts, receipts, and the truth. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez hadn't just stumbled into becoming Congress's sharpest mind. She'd built herself into a political weapon through preparation, study, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from actually having to work for a living. The journey from bartender to congressional force wasn't luck. It was architecture. Every shift at the bar had been a masterclass in human psychology. Every rude customer was practice for dealing with rude congressmen. Every night managing drunk egos was preparation for managing Matt Gaetz. She'd learned to smile while calculating tips, to deflect harassment while taking orders, to multitask under pressure while keeping perfect mental records of who owed what. Skills that, it turned out, translated perfectly to Congress. But AOC didn't rely on just street smarts. She'd graduated cum laude from Boston University with degrees in economies, CS, and international relations. While Gaetz was failing his way up through nepotism, she was studying the systems that kept working people down. While he was learning to lie from his politician father, she was learning to organize from her community. The bartender had more intellectual firepower than the privileged son, and she was about to prove it. Her approach to Gaetz was surgical. She didn't just react to his attacks. She studied them like a scientist studying a virus. Her team had compiled what they called the Gaetz files. Every sexist tweet, every condescending interview, every hypocritical vote. They'd mapped his patterns, identified his triggers, predicted his attacks. They knew he'd go after her background, her age, her gender. They were ready. They expect emotion. I give them evidence. This philosophy had become her superpower. While her opponents waited for the young Latina to lose her temper, to fulfill their stereotypes, she responded with facts so precise they cut deeper than any insult. When they called her dumb, she'd explain complex policy. When they called her inexperienced, she'd cite their failures. When they attacked her bartending past, she'd remind them that at least she'd worked for her money. The network she'd built was formidable. Not the old boys club of Washington insiders, but researchers, activists, and yes, other former service workers who understood that preparation was the great equalizer. They fed her information, tracked voting records, compiled receipts. While Gaetz relied on his privilege, AOC relied on her people. Guess which one was more effective? For this specific confrontation, the preparation had been exhaustive. She knew the ethics bill would trigger Gaetz. It threatened his entire way of life. She knew he'd attack her personally. He always did when threatened. She knew he'd underestimate her. Men like him always did. So she prepared not just to defend, but to destroy. Her staff had worked around the clock, building a dossier that would make opposition researchers weep with envy. Every Gaetz scandal cross-referenced. Every payment tracked. Every connection mapped. But more than that, they'd prepared responses that would resonate beyond the House floor. This wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about exposing corruption in a way that would echo through social media, that would educate and activate millions. The night before the debate, AOC had done something that would have surprised her critics. She didn't practice zingers or one-liners. She studied financial documents, legal filings, voting records. She absorbed information like a sponge, building an arsenal of facts that would be more devastating than any insult. She knew that in the attention economy, the person with receipts wins. He thinks I'm just a bartender, she'd told her team. Good. Let him think that. The best part about being underestimated is that your opponents tell you exactly how they plan to lose. She'd identified Gaetz's fatal weakness. He believed his own hype. He thought privilege made him untouchable, that wealth made him smart, that connections made him powerful. He'd never faced someone who'd had to be twice as good to get half as far. He'd never debated someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of dealing with entitled men who thought they were God's gift to women and the world. Walking into that House chamber, AOC carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd done their homework. Not the false bravado of privilege, but the quiet certainty of preparation. She had facts where Gaetz had bluster. She had receipts where he had rhetoric. She had the truth where he had nothing but lies and projection. The trap wasn't just set. It was gift-wrapped with a bow. All Gaetz had to do was be himself. And then AOC stood up, and Matt Gaetz learned what happens when you corner someone who's been preparing for exactly this moment. But first, he had to walk into the trap with all the confidence of a predator who'd never been prey. The afternoon session had given Gaetz exactly what he craved: attention and a platform. He'd spent an hour attacking the ethics bill with increasingly personal jabs at its supporters, but his favorite target was always AOC. She was everything that triggered him: young, female, popular, and worst of all, she acted like she belonged there. "You know what's really rich?" Gaetz began, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that only comes from never having to earn anything. "We have members of Congress who were mixing drinks 2 years ago now trying to lecture us about financial ethics. Maybe if the gentlewoman from New York spent less time on Instagram and more time understanding how the economy actually works, she'd realize why her socialist fantasies are destroying America." The Republican side chuckled and nodded, the kind of performative support that weak men give to weaker arguments. Jim Jordan actually applauded. Paul Gosar made drink-mixing gestures. They were having the time of their lives watching Gaetz attack the woman they all secretly feared, the one who'd changed the game, who'd made them all look old and out of touch just by existing. "Financial literacy," Gaetz continued, warming to his theme, "isn't something you learn pouring shots for Wall Street bros who overtip because they feel sorry for you. It's something you learn through real experience, real business, real understanding of how money works." AOC continued taking notes, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. Occasionally, she'd look up at Gaetz with an expression that wasn't anger or hurt. It was almost pity, like watching someone dig their own grave and being too stupid to notice. She made a small mark on her paper every time he said something that would come back to haunt him. The page was getting full. "The gentlewoman talks about ethics," Gaetz said, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "But what does she know about the real world? About meeting payrolls? About creating jobs? About the hard choices that those of us with real experience have to make?" That's when AOC smiled. Not broadly, just a slight upturn of her lips that somehow made Gaetz falter mid-sentence. It was the smile of someone who'd just heard exactly what they'd been waiting for. She wrote something on her pad and underlined it twice. Gaetz, unsettled but unable to stop himself, doubled down. "Some of us have real experience in the real world, not just experience posting selfies and making cocktails for tips. Some of us understand that governance requires more than Twitter followers and a bartending license." The words hung in the air like a confession. Every attack on her working-class background, every dismissal of her intelligence, every sexist insinuation. He'd laid it all out perfectly, exactly as she'd predicted. The T-rap wasn't just sprung. Gaetz had sprinted into it at full speed. AOC slowly closed her notepad and looked up at Gaetz with the calm of someone about to perform surgery. The slight smile was still there, but now it carried something else: anticipation. The room seemed to sense the shift. Democrats leaned forward. Even some Republicans looked nervous, sensing that their colleague might have gone too far. "Real experience," AOC repeated quietly, as if tasting the words. "The gentleman from Florida wants to discuss real experience." She stood slowly, deliberately, with the controlled movements of someone who knew that every gesture would be replayed millions of times. Her hand went to the folder on her desk, a folder Gaetz hadn't noticed, but should have. It was thick, very thick. I agree, Congressman Gaetz. Let's talk about experience. Let's talk about the real world. Let's talk about financial literacy. Her voice was calm, conversational, almost friendly. It was the voice of someone about to destroy you with a smile. Gaetz's smirk flickered. Something in her tone, in her confidence, in that folder, made him realize he might have miscalculated. But it was too late. He'd already said the words. He'd already sprung the trap. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was about to show him what happened when you confused privilege with intelligence, when you mistook working class with worthless, when you thought the bartender was the dumb one in the room. The surgical destruction was about to begin. Let's talk about experience, Matt. Specifically, your Venmo experience. The words landed like a precision missile. Gaetz's smirk vanished so fast it might have set a congressional record. His face went through a spectacular journey from smug to shocked to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. The House chamber, which had been buzzing with Republican laughter moments before, fell silent like someone had hit a cosmic mute button. AOC opened her folder with the deliberate care of a prosecutor presenting evidence. You want to discuss financial literacy? Let's start with your Venmo payments. $900 to someone labeled tuition. Interesting, considering the recipient wasn't enrolled in any school. $750 for ice cream. That's some expensive dessert, Congressman. Gaetz shot to his feet, his face now achieving a shade of red previously unknown to science. This is outrageous. You can't. I can't what? AOC interrupted smoothly, her voice maintaining that devastating calm. I can't read public records. I can't discuss financial transactions that are currently under federal investigation. Strange position for someone who just spent 20 minutes lecturing me about transparency and ethics. She pulled out a printed page, holding it up for the C-SPAN cameras to catch. Let's continue with your experience, shall we? May 2018, $500 for salad. June 2018, $300 for juice. Either you have the most expensive dietary habits in Congress, or, and I'm just speculating here, these might be code words for something else entirely. The chamber was electric. Democrats sat transfixed, watching their youngest member perform political surgery with the precision of a 20-year veteran. Republicans studied their phones, their desks, anything but the systematic destruction happening in real time. Even the gallery had gone silent, everyone leaning forward to witness history. I serve drinks, AOC continued, her voice gaining strength without gaining volume. You served subpoenas? No, wait, that's not right. You were served subpoenas. My mistake. Easy to confuse when you're just a financially illiterate bartender. Gaetz tried to interrupt again, his voice cracking with desperation. This is a witch hunt. These are fake accusations. You're taking things out of context. Context? AOC's eyebrow arched perfectly. Let me provide some context. Your associate Joel Greenberg is currently in federal prison, cooperating with prosecutors about your shared experiences. Your financial records are under FBI investigation. You're facing potential charges that would make a mob lawyer blush. But please, tell me more about my lack of real-world experience. She flipped to another page, each movement deliberate, theatrical, designed for maximum impact. You want to discuss financial literacy? Let's discuss your legal fees. $2. $5 million and counting, according to public filings. That's a lot of money for someone who claims to be innocent. I managed to pay off my student loans on a bartender's salary. You can't even pay your lawyers without begging donors for help. Gaetz was unraveling in real time. His perfect hair was wilting, sweat visible through his TV makeup, his hands gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just repeating fake news. This is character assassination. Character assassination? AOC laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. Matt, you can't assassinate what's already dead. Your character committed suicide the moment you decided to use Venmo for, what was it again? Tuition payments to teenagers? The Republicans who'd been cheering Gaetz minutes earlier were now physically distancing themselves. Jim Jordan had actually moved his chair. Marjorie Taylor Greene was studying her phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. They could smell political death, and it was coming from Gaetz's direction. AOC stood now, gathering her papers with the satisfied air of someone who'd just completed a masterpiece. You asked about my experience? Here it is. I worked 80-hour weeks to help my family. I served entitled men who thought tipping gave them the right to grab me. I smiled through harassment because I needed the job. I learned more about economics calculating tips than you learned inheriting daddy's money. She paused, letting the silence build, then delivered the kill shot with the timing of a professional comedian. I may have been a bartender, but at least I wasn't a customer. And based on your Venmo history, you were definitely a regular. The kind we'd cut off and call a cab for. The kind who thought money could buy anything, including things that weren't for sale. The Democratic side erupted. Not polite congressional applause, but a standing ovation that shook the chamber. Young staffers were openly filming, rules be damned. Even some moderate Republicans were nodding, unable to deny the complete devastation they'd just witnessed. Gaetz stood at his podium like a broken mannequin, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his political career dying in real time on C-SPAN. AOC gathered her folder, that beautiful, terrible folder full of receipts, and smiled. Not the cruel smile of victory, but the satisfied smile of justice, served at exactly the right temperature. She'd done what the FBI was still building a case to do. She'd exposed Matt Gaetz for exactly what he was, using his own words, his own actions, his own arrogance, as the weapons of his destruction. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss experience, Congressman, she said, sitting back down. This has been educational. The gavel fell, but it was unnecessary. The execution was complete. Matt Gaetz had been politically murdered by a bartender from the Bronx, and the weapon had been nothing more than the truth, served straight up, no chaser. But this was about more than one viral destruction. This was about what happens when intelligence meets ignorance. Within seconds of AOC's mic drop, the internet transformed into a 24/7 celebration of the most satisfying political destruction in congressional history. AOC. And Gaetz wasn't just trending. It was dominating every platform, every country, every conversation. The hashtag hit #1 worldwide, faster than a Taylor Swift album drop, and with better reviews. Within minutes, I may have been a bartender, but at least I wasn't a customer, had been tweeted, retweeted, screenshotted, memed, and tattooed, probably, millions of times. The bartender line became an instant classic, the kind of political burn that gets studied in communications classes and printed on t-shirts within hours. Someone set it to the beat drop in a dozen different songs. Another genius created a remix using Gaetz's stammering response as percussion. The internet, in all its chaotic glory, had found its new favorite moment, and it was milking it for every drop of serotonin. Gen Z, the undisputed champions of digital mockery, went absolutely feral. Venmo Matt became the new OK Boomer, a dismissive shorthand for corrupt politicians who thought they were untouchable. TikTokers created elaborate skits of Gaetz trying to explain his Venmo payments. This $900 was for, very expensive ice cream, the kind that goes to college? The tuition jokes wrote themselves, and Gen Z wrote them all. The memes evolved at fiber optic speed. Gaetz's panicked face became the new shocked Pikachu. His Venmo history was photoshopped onto everything from restaurant menus to college applications. Someone created a Matt Gaetz payment generator that produced random suspicious transactions. $600 for homework help, $400 for vitamin water, $1,000 for definitely not crimes. It crashed from traffic within hours. Gaetz's attempt at damage control became its own disaster. Within hours, he posted a response video from his car, because apparently, all political meltdowns now happen in vehicles. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wild, his voice hoarse from what looked like either screaming or crying or both. "The radical left is trying to destroy me for speaking truth," he ranted to his phone. "AOC is a socialist who knows nothing about—" He was cut off by his own phone falling, revealing him fumbling in his car like a drunk teenager trying to make a TikTok. The ratio was biblical, 100 likes to 50,000 quote tweets, each more brutal than the last. "This man looks like he just realized Venmo keeps records," one viral response noted. Another, "Matt Gaetz making response videos like a YouTuber who just got exposed for grooming." The cell phone was so complete it almost felt like performance art. Republicans distanced themselves from Gaetz at the speed of light. Senators who'd taken photos with him suddenly developed amnesia. "Matt who?" became the GOP's official response. Kevin McCarthy released a statement so generic it could have been written by predictive text. The House remains focused on the people's business. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, who'd literally applauded Gaetz hours earlier, tweeted about the importance of ethical leadership without a trace of irony. AOC's follower count exploded like a social media supernova. She gained 3 million followers in 6 hours, breaking some kind of record that Twitter would probably create just to acknowledge it. Her mentions were flooded with everything from marriage proposals to job offers to requests for her to destroy other corrupt politicians. "Do Ted Cruz next," became a common refrain. "Please end Ron DeSantis," begged Florida residents. Legal experts flooded cable news to explain why this was catastrophic for Gaetz, beyond just embarrassment. When a member of Congress publicly confirms details that match an ongoing federal investigation, that's what we call evidence, former prosecutor Preet Bharara explained on CNN. AOC didn't just embarrass him, she may have helped convict him. Harvard law professors were already adding the exchange to their trial advocacy courses as an example of how to destroy a witness using their own words. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. Young women especially saw AOC as an avenging angel, the representative of every woman who'd been dismissed, demeaned, or degraded by men like Gaetz. She said what we all wanted to say, became a rallying cry. The bartender jokes that had been used to diminish her became a badge of honor. Servers and service workers across America posted photos with the caption, "At least I'm not a customer." By midnight, the video had been viewed over 100 million times across all platforms. News outlets worldwide covered it as a watershed moment in American politics. The BBC called it the day the bartender served justice. French media praised La Destruction Magnifique. Even Russian state media seemed impressed by the thoroughness of the demolition. But perhaps the most telling response came from young women considering running for office. Applications to run for local positions spiked overnight. "If AOC can destroy Matt Gaetz, I can take on my city council," became a movement. Political science professors reported record interest in their courses. The AOC effect was real, measurable, and spreading. The internet had spoken, and its verdict was unanimous. Matt Gaetz had been ended, deleted, destroyed. And AOC? She'd become something more than a politician. She'd become proof that preparation beats privilege, that authenticity beats authority, and that sometimes the bartender is the smartest person in the room. But this was about more than one viral destruction. This was about what happens when intelligence meets ignorance, when preparation confronts privilege, when authentic leadership faces corrupt power. AOC's demolition of Matt Gaetz represented something profound for American democracy: the revenge of competence. The power of preparation over privilege had never been more starkly displayed. Gaetz had every advantage: wealth, connections, the presumption of superiority that comes from never having to earn anything. But AOC had something more powerful. She'd done the work. While he was coasting on Daddy's money and Daddy's name, she was studying. While he was learning to lie, she was learning to lead. The bartender had outworked the air, and the results were devastating. This highlighted a fundamental truth about working-class experience creating better leaders. AOC understood budgets because she'd had to make $200 last 2 weeks. She understood healthcare because she'd been uninsured. She understood corruption because she'd seen how the powerful prey on the powerless, every shift behind the bar. Her inexperience was actually expertise in real life, something Gaetz wouldn't recognize if it served him a subpoena. The importance of women confronting predators directly couldn't be overstated. For too long, men like Gaetz had operated with impunity, protected by a system that valued their potential over their victims' pain. AOC had broken that pattern, using the very platform they'd tried to deny her to expose their corruption. She'd shown that the best response to predation wasn't silence or civility. It was public, documented, devastating accountability. Why did authenticity beat authority every time? Because voters, especially young voters, had developed allergic reactions to fake politicians. Gaetz's manufactured outrage, his performative patriotism, his hollow attacks, they all crumbled when faced with AOC's genuine intelligence and real experience. She didn't need to pretend to be something she wasn't. Her authenticity was her authority, and it carried more weight than all of Gaetz's inherited influence. This became the model for young progressives nationwide. You didn't need to come from money. You didn't need an Ivy League degree. You didn't need to play by the old rules that protected the corrupt and silenced the competent. You needed to work harder, prepare better, and speak truth with the confidence that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. AOC had shown that the tools of the establishment could be turned against it. The redefinition of strength in politics was perhaps the most lasting impact. For decades, political strength had been defined by who could yell loudest, who could attack hardest, who could dominate through aggression. AOC had redefined it as who could research deepest, who could remain calmest, who could destroy with facts rather than fury. She'd shown that real strength wasn't about breaking others down, it was about building yourself up so thoroughly that their attacks bounced off like spitballs off armor. Young women across the country took note. The applications to run for office that spiked after the confrontation weren't just about inspiration. They were about recognition. Recognition that their bartending experience, their retail experience, their real-world experience wasn't a liability, but an asset. That their authenticity wasn't a weakness, but a weapon. That they didn't need to become like the Matt Gaetzes to beat them. They needed to be more themselves. The model was clear. No more than them. Work harder than them. When they attack your background, make it your strength. When they question your qualifications, show your receipts. When they try to diminish you, let them reveal themselves. And always, always come prepared with facts that their privilege can't deflect. This wasn't just about one corrupt congressman getting exposed. This was about proving that American democracy's antibodies still worked. That corruption could still be confronted. That privilege wasn't protection if you faced someone who'd done their homework. That intelligence, properly deployed, was the ultimate form of justice. AOC had done more than destroy Matt Gaetz. She'd provided a blueprint for how to fight back against every corrupt politician who thought their power made them untouchable. She'd shown that you didn't need to match their corruption with more corruption, their darkness with more darkness. You needed to show up with receipts, speak truth with confidence, and let their own actions convict them in the court of public opinion. The lesson resonated far beyond politics. In boardrooms and classrooms, in workplaces and community meetings, people who'd been dismissed and diminished saw a new way forward. Not through playing the game by the old rules, but by changing the game entirely. By being so prepared, so authentic, so undeniably competent that the old attacks didn't just fail. They backfired spectacularly. Intelligence as justice. Preparation as power. Authenticity as authority. These weren't just political strategies, they were life strategies, and AOC had just given a masterclass in all three. Remember Matt Gaetz's destroyed expression? That perfect moment when privilege met preparation and lost? That wasn't just satisfaction. That was democracy defending itself. That was every dismissed worker, every underestimated woman, every person told they didn't belong, proving that competence conquers corruption every single time. In one surgical strike, AOC channeled the anger of millions who'd watched predators prosper while workers struggled. She showed us that the best revenge against those who dismiss your background is to make that background your superpower. This is what we must demand from our leaders. Not inherited influence, but earned intelligence. Not privilege, but preparation. Not authority, but authenticity. When corrupt politicians attack working-class backgrounds, they attack most of America. When they dismiss service experience, they dismiss the very people who keep this country running. Support leaders who've mixed drinks and balanced budgets on minimum wage, who've served customers and constituents with equal dignity, who bring receipts instead of rhetoric. Because that's where real leadership comes from, not from ivory towers, but from bar tops and bus stops. Want to see more predators face consequences? More corrupt politicians meet their match? More authentic leaders rise while the privileged fall? Subscribe now. Because every view validates working Americans, every share spreads the revolution, and every subscription says we're done letting the Matt Gaetzes of the world confuse inheritance with intelligence. The future belongs to the bartenders, not the customers.